If you've ever wondered why your photographs sometimes come out blurry or why your camera seems to have a mind of its own when it comes to focusing, well, stick around. I'm going to break down your camera's focusing modes in a way that makes total sense, even if you're an amateur photographer like me. We're going to cover the main focus modes that you're going to find on your camera. Plus, I've got a bonus tip at the end of this video that's going to blow your mind when it comes to focusing in low light situations. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one, so let's get started. All right, so let's talk about single AF mode. And this is the most straightforward focus mode, and it's perfect when you're shooting stuff that isn't moving around very much. Think portraits, landscapes, or perhaps that arty shot of the coffee cup on the table in front of you that you're planning on posting on Instagram. Now, here is how it works. You pick a focus point, usually by moving the little square around your viewfinder, then you half press the shutter button. Your camera will focus on that point in the scene and it'll lock that focus in place. It's like your camera saying, okay, I've got this, bro. Don't worry about it anymore. Now, here's the thing about single AF mode. Once it locks focus, it's not going to change its mind. Even if your subject moves around a bit, your focus is going to stick to its guns. And this can be great if you're trying to nail the focus in a specific part of your image, like your model's eyes in a portrait. But here is a tip. If you're using single AF mode and your subject does move, you're going to have to release the shutter button, then half press it again to refocus. Otherwise, you're still going to be locked onto the previous focus point that you originally selected. Now, if the thing that you're focusing on has moved left or right or up or down within the frame, then the subject is still going to be in focus. But if they've moved forwards or they've moved backwards, they may have now moved out of the plane of focus that you selected when you half pressed your shutter button. And that is when you need to refocus. Now, single AF is great for still subjects, but what happens if you're trying to capture something that's moving a little faster, like a bird taking off from a lake? That is where our next focus mode comes into play. All right, moving on to continuous AF mode. And this is where things start to get a little bit more exciting. If single AF is like taking a portrait of your dog laying in a pile of mud, well, switching to continuous AF is for when that same dog sees a squirrel, goes bananas, and starts chasing it down. So continuous AF is all about tracking moving subjects. It's perfect for sports, wildlife, or trying to photograph your kids when they've had too much sugar. In this mode, your camera is constantly adjusting focus as long as you're half pressing that shutter button to get whatever is in the box within focus. It's like your camera saying, hey, don't worry, I've got my eye on things. When you press that shutter, I will get the right focus. I'm doing all the work on your behalf. And this is where it gets cool. Most modern cameras can use multiple focus points in autofocus mode. So instead of focusing on just one spot, it's like your camera has a whole team of little individual focus points working together to track your subject across the entire frame. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. But here is the thing. Continuous autofocus can be tricky. It's not always perfect, especially if your subject is moving erratically across the frame. And I've definitely had my fair share of blurry bird, and I've got a golden retriever, right? Blurry dog photos as well, where the camera is focused on the background rather than the bird or Walter, my dog. When you're in continuous AF mode, it's like your camera is trying to play a game of chess with your subject, and sometimes the camera loses. One tip that I found helpful when using continuous autofocus mode is, and camera manufacturers kind of say that this isn't a problem anymore, it used to be on older cameras, but I still find it's more effective, is to use the center focus point when shooting in continuous AF. It, in my experience, is the most sensitive and accurate area of the sensor. So if continuous AF is fantastic when you know that you've got an action shot, what do you do if you're not sure if your subject is going to stay still or going to start moving? Well, camera manufacturers have thought of that too, and that's where our next mode comes in real handy. Okay, now let's talk about AF Auto Hybrid mode. And this is like the I just can't make up my mind as a photographer mode of focus. Some cameras call it AF Auto or Automatic AF, but basically it's a mode that tries to be smart and switch between single AF and continuous AF depending on what it thinks is happening within the scene. If the camera thinks that the subject of your shot is staying still, it acts like single AF mode. But if it starts to detect movement, it'll switch to continuous AF. It's like having a little focus helper in your camera trying to anticipate what you're going to need to get the best output. Now, I'll be honest, I never use this mode. I find it can be a bit unpredictable. Sometimes it works great and other times it just seems to get confused. That being said, if you're just starting out, this mode can be a good way to get a feel for how your camera is going to focus in different situations without having to switch and change settings, which if you try to do this in a panic in the moment might lead you to missing the shot altogether. It's like having training wheels for your photography when you're learning all about the different focus modes. Just don't be afraid to take those training wheels off and start proactively using single AF or continuous AF once you get a little bit more comfortable. The hybrid mode can be a jack of all trades, but what if you're venturing into the world of video? Well, don't worry, there's a focus mode specifically designed for that. All right, let's talk about a mode that's a bit of a specialist. Full-time Servo AF, or sometimes it's known as AF-F. And this one is specifically for the video shooters out there. Now, I'll be the first to admit I'm not much of a videographer. The last time I tried to shoot a wildlife video, it looked like it was filmed by a drunk monkey on a roller coaster. But for those of you who are braver than me and who actually venture into video, this mode can be pretty cool. AF-F is like continual autofocus, but on steroids. It's constantly adjusting focus during the video recording, trying to keep your subject sharp even if they're moving around. It's like having an additional member of a film crew right there in the camera, focus pulling and making sure that you don't miss the shot. But here's the thing. Whilst it can be super helpful, it's not always perfect. If you're filming something with loads and loads of movement, or you're trying to film something in low light, you might notice the camera, what we call hunting back and forth. This is the camera overshooting and then undershooting in an attempt to get sharp focus, and it just butchers your video. It's really distracting for the viewer. So if you're really serious about video, you might want to consider the next focus mode. Manually focusing your camera seems like a really old school way to focus, but there are a bunch of reasons why you should probably consider it. Firstly, for example, when I'm doing landscape photography, I've got the camera, it's sat on top of a tripod, I'm typically in no rush to take my picture, and so there's no pressure to rely on the camera to nail the focus for me. It makes total sense to spend 4 seconds to rotate the focus ring on the front of my lens and manually focus and make sure that the focus is perfect rather than just hope that the camera has nailed focus every time for me. Modern autofocus for landscapes is pretty good, right? I've still had it fail me on a few occasions though. Additionally, manual focus can be really useful for doing macro photography. This is because in macro photography, there's a lot of depth to your image because you're so close to one part of it and relatively very far away from the background. And even the best cameras can struggle to understand what you actually want to focus on. That's when switching the camera to manual focus and doing that little bit of work yourself can really lead to much sharper macro images. Also, if you're doing street photography, for example, and you're trying to shoot through a window to a subject that's on the other side of it, well, switching to manual focus mode is often the only way to get the shot, as most of the time, automatic camera modes will want to focus on the pane of glass itself rather than the subject that is sat behind it. And so don't underestimate the power of manual focus. Now, we've covered the main focus modes, and you might be wondering, well, how the heck do I switch between each of them? Well, that's the next thing we're going to cover, and it's crucial for putting all of this knowledge into practice. Okay, so on my Sony camera, to change the focus setting, I've got to go to the menu. Camera settings number 1, page number 5, focus mode, and only then can I switch between the different modes. Obviously, this is not ideal. So instead of running through that rigmarole every time I want to change my focus setting, I've set up my function button menu to have autofocus modes there ready to go. Now, I'm mainly shooting landscape photography, and so it's so very, very rare that I have to quickly change my autofocus settings. But if I was shooting sports, for example, and I needed to be able to switch between autofocus continue and autofocus single point in a heartbeat, I would customize a button on the camera to bounce back and forth between the two settings. Now, this is obviously different for every single camera, the number of custom buttons that you have, the function menus that you have available to you. So the best advice I can give you is to check the camera manual. And I know, reading a camera manual is about as exciting as watching paint dry, but trust me, if you've got a new camera, it's probably worth it. Once you figure out how to quickly switch between focus modes, it's like unlocking a new photography superpower. Think of it this way. We are really, really, really lucky to have all of this autofocus technology in the literal palm of our hands. Leica patented the first autofocus system in 1973, and the world's first fully autofocus capable camera came out in 1985. And so there's going to be plenty of people watching this video right now who have taken high quality photographs with no option of autofocus whatsoever. So do the work, get it set up and start using it because it's so powerful. And here is a pro tip. Practice switching between the modes without looking at your camera. If you can do it by feel, you're going to be able to react much quicker when you're out shooting. You're going to become a focus mode ninja. All right, so now that you know how to switch between the different modes, let's talk about that bonus tip that I promised earlier. This one is a real game changer, especially if you're shooting in challenging lighting conditions. When you're shooting in low light, your camera's autofocus can struggle. It's like trying to find your way around a dark room. It's not impossible, but it's definitely going to be tricky. Now, here's the secret. Try and use the center focus point on your camera's sensor. It's usually the most sensitive and accurate, especially in low light. It's like someone giving you a flashlight to navigate in that dark room. But what if you don't want the subject that you're trying to focus on in the center of the frame? That's where the focus and recompose technique comes in. You focus using the center point and then recompose your shot whilst holding that focus locked in. And that's going to give you the best chance of grabbing focus when the conditions are not ideal. And if you found this video helpful and you want to take your photography skills to that next level, why not check out my video on getting crazy sharp photos by clicking the video that's on screen right now.